Understanding racism. First of all, I just want to thank each and every one of you students, young people and academics coming out today to enable me to give you some information that hopefully you'll be able to utilize within your studies or within your personal lives. It's my obligation, it's my duty as an educator, as a lecturer, as a father, as a member of the community, a son or brother, to give you this information that you can utilize. Now, there may be information that you may not understand, there may be information that may confuse you at times. Please write it down on a piece of paper, ask that question towards the end, and then we can go through it. I love being challenged. I love when people put their hand up and say, you know what you just said is incorrect, so we can talk about it, because one of the most important things that we don't have in these communities and education, in these educational spaces, is this opportunity to be able to talk about harsh issues that impact on a range of different people, and speak about that positively, and feel that, or enable people to feel that they're comfortable without people judging them or mistreating them based on some of the information that they say. So the information in the session that we're going to do right now is going to be short, sweet, straight to the point. Please write it down on a piece of paper, and then at the end, I will allow you guys to ask those questions and then we can go on. Okay, why are we still talking about racism? 2014, we're still talking about racism. For some people, it just seems like an oft-repeated book. Over and over and over again, you all talking about racism. Black people, Asian people, everybody's talking about racism. However, we still know that racism takes place within our society, but there's many people that mention this term but don't understand what it means and how that adversely impacts on certain people within today's society. So again, what I'm going to do today is present you some information that is short and sweet, and it's going to enable you guys to have a discussion, ask questions, and try and have that understanding, because there's people in this room that will benefit from this information, and those that are watching it through the webinar, watching it through YouTube or watching it through whatever, will enable people to have that understanding. Okay, so what is racism? We hear about racism all the time, but what is it? What is racism? We ask people every single day, what is racism? People don't know what racism is, but I think it's important that before we look at racism, to start breaking down some of those terminologies that ascribe to that terminology of racism. So let's just look at what a racist is first. So a racist is a noun. It's a person who believes in racism, the doctrine that a certain human race is superior to any or all others. I'll say that one more time, and this is from the Oxford Dictionary. It's a noun. A person who believes in racism, the doctrine that a certain human race is superior to any or all others. So before we look at racism, we have to understand what a racist is. And when I'm going to present a couple more slides a little bit later, that's going to enable you to understand where we're all interlinked, then we'll have an understanding of what a racist is and what racism is. Anybody can be a racist. I see a few smiles in the room. Anybody can be a racist. But racism is different to a racist. And we're going to be looking at that in slides to come. Definition of racism. Racism is also a noun. The belief that all members of each race possess characteristics, abilities or qualities specific to that race, especially so as to distinguish it as inferior or superior to other race or races. Number two, abusive or aggressive behavior towards members of another race on the basis of that such belief. A bit jargonistic, but when we're looking at racism, I think this is the reason why we have that confusion, because you see these Oxford Dictionary phrases and you see these Oxford Dictionary definitions, and people have that misunderstanding of what racism is. So people will call a person racist and say they're propagating racism, but not really understanding the two terms. So I'll just say it one more time just for your understanding. So a racist is a person or group of people that believe in racism. The doctrine of a certain human race is superior to any or all others. Again, a racism is also a noun, the belief that all members of each race possess characteristics, abilities or qualities to a specific race, especially so as to distinguish it as inferior or superior to another race or races. 2, abusive or aggressive behavior towards members of another race on the basis of such belief. But back to that question, what is racism? To add to that whole jargonistic definition that you just heard from the Oxford Dictionary, those are what people quote all the time, and I think it's fair that I quote what's also in the Oxford Dictionary because it's there within your curriculum. People start asking that question, what racism is. to understand it all, to understand what a racism, we first have to go back into and use other terms, such as prejudice. What is prejudice? Prejudice is also a noun, an unfavourable opinion or feeling formed beforehand without knowledge, thought or reason, a preconceived opinion or feeling, either favourable or unfavourable. 3, unreasonable feelings, opinions, attitudes, especially of a hostile nature regarding a racial, religious or national group. So this is when you're basically saying that I don't like you based on what you look like. I don't like black people because they're thieves. I don't like all Asians because they're terrorists. I don't like all white people because they stink. So these are things that we often hear every single day. I got you guys to write that in the last session, and these were the things that I pulled out when I asked you that question. What are the stereotypes? What are some of the misconceived information that we hear about different groups? And they're always the top things: black people, thieves, robbers, drug dealers, Asian people, sometimes likewise drug dealers, terrorists, white people, pedophiles. These are the terms that we always hear on a day-to-day basis. So again, when we're looking at prejudice, it's unfavourable opinions or feeling formed beforehand or without knowledge, thought or reason. So you're prejudging someone, you're judging someone before the fact, before the information. But one of the things that is interesting when we're looking at racism, and we're looking at that question racism, is that oftentimes we don't look at the importance of power and where power plays in relation to the issue of racism. So let's look at what power is, and then I'm going to do something for you to kind of break that down to give you a quicker understanding of what racism is. Power's definition: the ability to do or act, capability of doing or accomplishing something. Number 2, political or national strength. 3, great or marked ability to do or act, strength, might, force. Number 4, the possession of control or command over others, authority, ascendancy, power over minds. 5, political ascendancy or to control in the government of a country or state. So again, when we're looking at the defining what we mean by power, we have to understand what power is according to the Oxford Dictionary. But again, when we're looking at racism, people tend to talk about it based on an emotional response, based on also what people think and what they feel. But they don't often talk about how power is utilized in order to adversely impact on the lives of certain groups of people. So I'm going to come up with an equation that is often used by academics to give you all the understanding of what racism is. So anytime that somebody asks you the question, what is racism? This is my formula. That formula is prejudice plus power. I'll say that one more time. Prejudice plus power. Prejudice, that fixated idea, that preconceived opinion or feeling about another person based on their race, based on their ethnicity. But not just about the preconceived ideas, the fixated ideas, not just about the preconceived knowledge that you have about a person before you meet them, but also power. And people in specific places, specific spaces within society that utilize their power along with their prejudice and adversely impact on the lives of people around the world. Last week we had a discussion, and when I presented this information, there was a lot of people that were confused, and it caused a lot of argument in the room, which is fine and is fair, and hopefully you guys will present some of those questions continuing from last week's session. And what we looked at was what is called black racism, and what we looked at what was called white racism. So black racism, and I asked you all that fundamental question. Let's look at prejudice and power. So let's look at black racism, for example. So if we're saying black racism, how does black racism adversely impact the lives of white people? Just write those things down, and I asked you all that question also. How does black racism adversely impact the lives of white people? Talking about power now. Black people utilizing power to adversely impact the lives of white people. Write that down. Okay, number 2, let's now look at white racism. Let's look at white racism. So how does white racism adversely impact the lives of black people in today's society or across the globe, whether it's local or global? Again, utilising power. How does white racism, if we're looking at power, how does white racism adversely impact the lives of black people within today's society? Is there confusion in the room? There is. There is. Okay, let's look at white racism. Let's look at black racism again. Can anybody tell me in this room right now, based on prejudice and power, where black racism adversely impacts the lives of white people as a whole? I'm not looking at specific issues within British society where groups of people have been mistreated based on a couple of black people or Asian people or people that are classified as non-white within a particular area. I'm talking about as a whole. Can anybody name any? Just everyone looking around the room. Okay, cool. Okay, now let's look at white racism. Can anybody tell me anywhere within society, British society, where white racism adversely impacts the lives of black people? Education, law, politics. Interesting. So when we start to look at racism and we start to actually break it down and dissect it, you start to see the fundamentals in the way in which racism is utilised in order to impact the lives of certain groups of people. So I think it's interesting that when we looked at that, I thought it was interesting last week. We also mentioned Neely Fuller, we mentioned Dr. Francis Cress-Welsing, and a lot of people came to a conclusion, and I thought I'd give you a different definition to the ones that which many of you used last week. I know some of you guys weren't present in that session, but this is a definition that we was alluding to. Dr. Francis Cress-Welsing, academic, you may have heard a book called the ISIS Papers. Yeah, a few people have heard of the ISIS Papers. Okay, so ISIS Papers is a book that I'll guarantee that most people read. So Dr. Francis Cress-Welsing, she utilises this term racism, but calls it white supremacy. And again, this was a terminology that many people utilised last week in the session, and it caused a lot of discussion. Racism, white supremacy, according to Dr. Francis Cress-Welsing, is the local or global power system and dynamic structured and maintained by persons who classify themselves as white, whether consciously or subconsciously determined, which consist of patterns of perception, logic, symbol formation, thought, speech, action, and emotional response, as conducted simultaneously in all areas of people activity: economics, education, entertainment, labour, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. Interesting that when I just asked you all that question about looking at black racism and white racism, and I thought it was interesting that I just threw it out there, that when we was looking at black racism, looking at adversely impacting the lives of white people, many of you guys in this room, and again there may be people that are watching on a webinar that might find examples, please let me know. But in this room specifically, when I asked you all that question, you couldn't find anything. But when I asked you the question about white racism and adversely impact on the lives of black people, for example, or people classified as non-white, you all came out with these things: economics, education, entertainment, law, politics, etc. So again, when Dr. Francis Cress-Welsing speaks about racism or labels calls it racism, white supremacy, again, it's the local and global power system. So she's also talking about the importance and the process of power and how power is utilized along with that prejudice. But she talks about it and she goes a little bit deeper, and she said it's maintained consciously or subconsciously, consists of pattern of perception, logic, symbol formation, thought, speech, action, and emotional response, and it's conducted simultaneously in all areas of people activity. So when we're looking at racism, I think it's important and it's imperative that we have an understanding of what these things mean, how that impacts people in today's society, because if we don't understand these terms and how it impacts on many of us, how it impacts on many people within society, then we can't move forward, we can't make change. So let's just look at it a little bit closer. Economics. How is power utilised within economics to adversely impact people within the community? Look at the class system within our communities. Where are the structures? Where are people in the highest places or the most privileged positions? And where are people that are classified as unprivileged positions? Education. Look at education across Just look at Birmingham, for example, the West Midlands. Let's look at the institutions, the colleges, the universities. Let's look at the race divide in terms of those that are classified as academic and those that are privileged in the sense that they can go to a red brick university like University of Birmingham. And then let's look at the mass groups of individuals that go to universities that are not classified as a red brick university. And let's look at those types of things. Entertainment, the argument was presented last week when we were looking at entertainment that anytime that black or Asian people are within the media, they're always in there for crime, they're always classed as, they're always in there for, whether it's to do with sport, whether it's to do with singing or music, or they're in there doing some sort of comedian, being some sort of comedians that is degrading their communities, that making people look at our communities and perceiving our communities as buffoons, as monkeys, etc., etc. These are what we presented last week. We look at law, we look at politics. We know about law in terms of the disproportionate numbers of people within the criminal justice system. We looked at stop and search last week. We looked at so many different things that when we're looking at law and how that impacts people within society, we can see how that's done. Religion, we know racism takes place within in a religious order across the world, whether you're Christian, whether you're Muslim, whether you're a Jew, whatever. Racism takes place within these spaces. And again, it's a discussion that people don't look at, people don't discuss enough, but it's there. So again, what I just wanted to do was give you guys that opportunity to look at that, to see that. And again, just in conclusion, just before we continue after the break, I think it's imperative, as I said before, that we begin to understand the fundamental difference between these terms, such as race, racist, racism, prejudice and power, and how they apply to specific groups of people across the globe. Moreover, it is not just about understanding these terms, rather it is about understanding the process of which power is used in all forms of human and people activity and ways to counteract it. And again, I think that it's important and it's imperative that we have these discussions. So before we go on a short break, I'm going to allow you guys to ask those questions. I'm going to allow you guys to discuss amongst yourselves and then again challenge me in anything that I've said. And again, everything that I've just presented is information that's out there. I've already gave you a book, definitions I've given you already, and all we've done is articulated what is already out there. And again, there's not many spaces within these educational institutions that allows lecturers and also students to have these discussions, that allows you guys to think outside of the box, to challenge things that's out there. Because many of you guys came to this room and many of you guys I've spoke to previously before we came here have had issues with racism, but don't understand what it is. Talk about issues that are taking place within your families and things you've seen within your communities and how that's impacted on you guys. So it's important that we have these discussions. And I'm just privileged that now that I'm in this position, I'm giving you all that opportunity and I'm creating spaces within these institutions for you guys to have those discussions.